So, great to be back. A year since last year at Scott Chain. And I think, as I said last year, real thanks to Michael for his leadership in driving the blockchain community and this conference, which is the highlight of our year. I think I have the job of talking about blockchain in the real world, and we'll touch on some of the themes that we heard in the earlier panel around those real-world use cases of these ledger technologies in business, in organizations, in government. And I'll try to make it quite practical and talk about some examples from our own learning journey, from what Wallet.Services have been through these past few years. I'll try to summarize some of the enterprise use cases that we've seen and focused on in our work, for example, with Scottish Government. And I'll finish with a little bit of an advertorial about what Wallet.Services do and the product that our world-class development team have built. So I'll try and do all that in the next 17 minutes, and then I think I usher you to join us for coffee in the break after that. So, where we got started in Wallet.Services, as founders, we're a bunch of enterprise software guys and security guys who started really with a common frustration, which I won't over-labor because I think I may have used this slide when we presented with the minister last year. But I kind of look back, I'm old enough to remember that time when I saw the first internet browser, and maybe 26, 27 years ago. And there's a bit of disappointment for how we deal with our digital lives today because it hasn't quite reached its potential in my point of view. So a lot of the way that we do business, the way that we deal with web applications as consumers is still pretty complex and disconnected. It involves a lot of rekeying of personal information, and increasingly it's pretty unsafe. So never a day goes by that we don't hear about a very large data breach, and it becomes quite apparent that we can't control use of our own information. I think I may have made the point last year when talking about government web applications in front of Paul Wheelhouse, the innovation minister at the time, that many government applications were just digital lipstick on the paper process pig. He doesn't answer my calls now. But I think we can all agree that there's been many examples of where we see those organizations who are in a pivotal position to hoard our data can sometimes seem to be incontinent in their handling of that data and their management of that data. And all of this stuff leads to friction in business, friction in how enterprises share data to enable their applications, especially when that data crosses organizational boundaries. The example I often use is where when we started a company, it took 3 weeks to open a business bank account. There's a whole bunch of rekeying of data, and some of the data coming back was not authentic because we ended up getting the wrong bank account number from our business banker and transferring a large sum of money into some randomer's bank account. And there's certainly personal risks to data, as many of us know. And I think that's really started to move into the public domain now. This gentleman is Tim Berners-Lee. He was the guy who knocked together that Mosaic browser that we saw a generation ago. And he's really articulating something which is a fundamental problem of digital society today, which is that we are in a position where the internet is not quite so distributed as we sort of thought it would be. It's become quite concentrated. Few companies own a lot of web activity, and therefore they retain our data, and we trust them. We are in a position where we have to trust them, but often that trust is betrayed. And Tim Berners-Lee is, in his new venture, is taking aim firmly on the Facebooks of this world and kind of identifying their high-profile data losses, 14 million users, and their handing over of analytical data to Cambridge Analytica earlier this year. But really that's just that's one example of a trend. You know, Tim Berners-Lee's Solid project, he's talking about a permissioned personal data store so that people can retain control over their own consumer data. It's part of a theme, though. It's been mentioned many times already today. The European Commission, with their data protection legislation, is aimed at the same kind of problem. And I noticed that in the budget recently, the UK government announced by 2020 they plan to use tax legislation to address some of this with the planned digital services tax, I think it's called. And even in California, back in the Valley, consumer privacy is starting to be looked at with the California Consumer Privacy Act. So, all very interesting in the citizen consumer data space. But why should organizations care? Why is it important to enterprises? Well, really the way we in Wallet.Services see the role of distributed ledger technologies is that they're making possible new models of trust between businesses and their customers. So it's not just in the business-to-consumer space, which we're all more aware of, it's in the news, but in the business-to-business space. How can we enable safe sharing of important, sensitive data, which might be personally sensitive or commercially sensitive, and retain control of that data? So really, as an employee of an organization, if you're looking to understand whether you should have a view of these distributed ledger technologies and how they apply to you, ask yourselves the questions: do you manage consumer or citizen data on their behalf? Do you collaborate on commercially sensitive data sets with other organizations, or do you have back office functions that involve business partners across the organizational boundary from where you sit, who want to eliminate friction and cost from those transactions? So that's kind of why we should care. But when will all of this happen? Quick add there. This report, which you see on the screen, is kind of part of our learning journey. We would view that enterprises and governments are still learning about these technologies. We're still in the experimental phase. And in Wallet.Services, we've made a business of helping organizations go through some of those experiments. But we're kind of at the MS-DOS stage of the PC revolution. This is still quite early days, and the standards are still to be put in place. And organizations still have to learn what this technology is really good for. But our learning journey started in public services, in government. I'm going to, if you'll indulge me, I'll tell you a bit about that learning journey and some of the real applications that we built along the way. This report was kind of at the end of that process. We synthesized a lot of our learning into a report which we were commissioned to deliver by Scottish Government as part of their digital strategy. And I would encourage you to give that a read. You can download that from our website or from the Scottish Government website. But if you come and have a cup of coffee with us at our stand and give me your business card, we'll send you a handy handbag-sized copy for you to read at your leisure. The applications of this technology in enterprise, though, what are they? So it may have been touched on before, but I actually lifted this slide from our colleagues at Microsoft. So this is their view, an ultimate summary of where this fits into the enterprise. They identify three rough categories. Managing assets and asset provenance is one of them. Tracking and tracing things like valuable assets. Say you want to know that your bottle of 30-year-old Glenmorangie is in fact has provenance, came from the right bonded warehouse, and hasn't just been topped up with Scottish Leader. A situation we've been involved with is looking at the assurance that celiacs can know that their gluten-free oats are in fact really gluten-free and haven't been contaminated in the supply chain. In multi-party auditing, that's situations where you want to enable transparent record, a bit like what the Estonian government do in terms of managing access to their public health records. and also in enabling competitors to collaborate on open data sets, which is something that we've been working on a bit more closer to home, and I'll touch on that. And then, as has already been defined in this across organisational boundaries, how do you connect those? I think we talked about the analysts with their spreadsheets in different organisations. How do you bring them together? How do you do paper-free processes that can streamline transactions and can protect information? So, how do we make a government application process like benefit applications paper-free and quick? Or how do we implement a smart border post-Brexit so that tariffs and customs are taken care of in a more automated manner? So to put that in real terms, how do we get started? Well, we got started with an application more than 2 years ago now, back in September 16, where we looked at building a prototype in partnership with Scottish Government as part of their CivTech programme, where we looked at doing cross-organisational application forms, really. And this particular situation we looked at was gun licenses, air weapon certificates, in fact. Why we did this was because we discovered that there were over 180 organisations just in Scottish Government who issued permits and licenses, often at costs of around about the £100 mark. It was quite an inefficient and large-scale process, and quite confusing often for the citizen. So the value that we delivered there was improved information security, and we were able to learn a lot about the approvals process there and learn that it had quite specific legal and governance language and convention, which we were able to bundle up and build into our product, Sika, which we subsequently worked on. A little bit more recently, towards the end of last year, we got involved in building a prototype use case with the Advanced Forming Research Centre, which was in looking at manufacturing records for subsea assets. These are the things called Christmas trees, which you put on wellheads that deal with quite complex devices that deal with the extraction of oil and gas in the North Sea. And they are built in quite a complex tiered supply chain involving operators like BP and the like, suppliers who engineer the products, and contractors and subcontractors, and assurance organisations who all come together to produce a manufacturing record book that guarantees how this asset has been constructed and how it could be used in operations and commissioning and decommissioning. So the value that we discovered there was really around compliance and efficiency in a marketplace where increasingly partners in the North Sea have to work together much more efficiently to extract the remaining energy. And we learned, in our learning journey, we learned a lot more there around the more complex inter-organisational data governance and the combinatorial data that was coming together in this quite complex solution. And we also learned a bit about how distributed trust amongst these sometimes competing partners meant that we had to protect data in some situations and respect their privacy. We moved on earlier this year to work around a situation where we were building cross-industry data sets. And we worked here with the visionary letting agent aggregator CityLets, who I think might be represented in the audience today. And this was in response to a situation where Scottish governments had empowered local authorities, the council, to put in place rent pressure zones where it could be shown that rents were rising beyond reasonable levels. There's a bit of a stramash around how data that can provide evidence for this should be put together. So our customer CityLet stepped forward and used our technology to produce that combined open data set from a group of competing companies who are competing for each other's business, the letting agents, And that allowed us to put in place this trust network with minimum infrastructure required from the letting agents. And this would otherwise have been difficult or impossible to provide. And I'm happy to say that that's moving forward in production later on this year. And then in the summer, we got involved in a situation which was kind of the tail end of what we started with Scottish Government. And our customer, the Improvement Service, who you might not have heard of, but they actually represent all of the 32 local authorities, and they support the Scottish Government My Account service. And that's integrated with the National Entitlement Card, which many of you might know under its one of its common incarnations, which is the Young Scots card that anybody with a 12 or 13-year-old child will receive. And we are looking there at how we can enable the inter-government agency approval processes that can empower entitlements and benefits to young people who might be in healthcare or education scenarios where they should receive those entitlements. The workflow that's represented there on the screen is around young apprentices receiving travel benefits to get them from their place of residence to their place of work. So that's been our learning journey, and we've seen some of the issues that enterprises face when they actually want to deploy these technologies into production. There are numerous issues in technology choice with the many evolving ledger technologies that you've already heard about today. How do we future-proof as these evolve? There are issues in terms of skills, in terms of developer skill set, if enterprises are actually building, and in the transition to a business model around this shared model of trust. And especially there are issues in terms of deployment. Enterprises usually are deploying these technologies rather than necessarily building applications on them. How do you deploy and manage and integrate with your existing investments and bridge to the existing world of your current enterprise systems? And really that's our vision, is to address some of these enterprise issues with our Sicker product, which we shipped earlier this year, back in June, and launched at the Scottish Blockchain Meetup. So Sicker is an application platform that can build these inter-organizational ledger networks and deals with the practical issues of design and implementation and deployment and management. It uses this metaphor of cross-organizational data flows as a workflow, which is constructed as a series of mutually agreed steps within that network. And we have reflected that language of business that we've learned in our proof of concept so far around supporting how we show and certify documents and evidence, how we can build that into an ordered chain of custody in a compliant sequence, and deliver robust permissioning of the data so that organizations are willing to participate in that network with full knowledge that they have full control over their data. And really that's what we've built. We've built our ledger deployment middleware Supernode platform, which is a born in the cloud, scalable node which manages implementation of this multi-organizational trust network. And it adds all of those enterprise abilities, the scalability, the scripting, the logging, the role-based access control that enterprises need to deploy applications, and supports that deployment of new ledgers with the kind of file new ease. Then our Sicker executor, which delivers that versioned schema-based data and workflow, supported by a multi-sig Wallet.Services, which is resilient to all of the common attacks and all the things that we learned in our earlier life looking at cryptocurrency exchanges, and delivers a web and mobile UI and an API for integration to existing systems like ERP and CRM systems that actually contain the data today in enterprises. And that's topped off with the SICA designer, which is our design surface, which allows these business processes to be designed at the analyst level as a non-developer tool, and define the basic data model, the steps, and the permissioning around that business process. That's all I've got. So I would encourage you to come and talk to us at our stand in the atrium. And I think it is now my job to announce coffee break. So you should be back by 15:15.